Worldwide, at least 97% of scientists agree that human activity is the primary driver behind climate change. And if we don't take actions like replacing fossil fuels with clean energy, eating less meat, and avoiding consumerism, then it's going to lead to a lot more frequent and intense natural disasters, losses of food production, and destabilization of communities, among many other challenges. That is exactly what I was told when I was a kid, and I'm sure that's nothing new for you. But if the science is so clear, and if climate change is such a big threat to society and the natural world, then why do so many people deny or cast doubt on climate change? What's going on, you guys? Welcome to my channel. I'm Aman Luthra, and today I'm going to be talking about why people deny climate change, and more importantly, what we can do about it. I was inspired to make this video because in my last video where I talked about where you should move to avoid climate change, a bunch of climate deniers left comments to justify why they think climate change is fake. Fair warning, those comments will be removed from this video too, because they are wrong. I'm sure you've heard at least one person say that climate change is a hoax, that humans do not contribute to climate change, or that there's not enough evidence to suggest that the climate is changing. In the United States, about 13% of people say that human activity has nothing to do with climate change, and another 5% say that the climate is not changing at all. And that includes a lot of big-name politicians like former President Trump, Ted Cruz, and Mitch McConnell, who have all casted doubt on the science behind climate change at some point. Climate change denial around the world usually hovers between 5 to 8%, and the only countries with a higher percentage of people who don't believe human activity is causing climate change are Saudi Arabia at 16% and Indonesia at 18%. So why do so many people cast doubt on climate change? Here's the short answer: money. There's a lot more to it than just that, but the primary reason climate change denial exists is because the fossil fuel industry wants to stay in business as long as possible. To do that, they send an average of $200 million every year to Congress and other government sectors to help vote against climate action. The top contributor is BP at roughly $53 million, while Shell, ExxonMobil, Chevron, and Total make up the rest of the top 5. There's a lot of other third-party organizations like the Koch Family Foundation that further donate. In 2022, with the 117th Congress, that has led to 109 representatives and 30 senators becoming rich and wealthy climate deniers. Oddly enough, these climate deniers make up 52% of House Republicans and 60% of Senate Republicans, while no Democratic or independent official has explicitly casted doubt on or denied climate change. However, it should be clear that non-Republicans also receive money to delay climate action, just not as much. What's even more interesting is that most fossil fuel companies publicly admit that climate change is real and that action needs to be taken. You'll hear messages from Shell, ExxonMobil, and others saying that they will be net zero by 2050 or sooner, and that they are investing in cleaner fuels and alternative energies. But I think you can tell by now that this is a massive scam. Most of these companies spend just around 1% of their budget on clean energy, and they often spend a lot more on marketing that they're shifting toward clean energy so that they can gain the trust of the public. So what's going on here? These massive oil and gas companies are spending money telling us all that climate change is real, but they're also spending money lobbying in Congress to deny climate change? Well, that's exactly their goal. It's to create confusion among the public by casting doubt on the science behind climate change. And this is nothing new. You may know back in the 1900s, the tobacco industry tried convincing the public that smoking was good for you. Some people told you that it was good, some people told you that smoking did not cause cancer, and others told you that there's not enough evidence to suggest that smoking was good or bad for you. A famous quote by an anonymous executive at a big tobacco company was, "Doubt is our product since it is the best means to compete with the body of fact that exists in the mind and the general public." It was a great formula that worked until the Richard Nixon administration banned cigarette ads in 1971. The reason casting doubt works is that it lets people believe what they want to believe and ignore the rest of the crowd, so it does not matter what is the cold and hard truth. So it's like you're smoking cigarettes and deep down you know it's bad for you, but because other people are doing it and telling you that it's okay to do it, it makes you feel better about smoking, so you keep doing it. Now the same playbook is being used to cast doubt on climate change. You'll hear a bunch of different thoughts on climate change, and people will gravitate towards whatever thoughts they want instead of the truth. When people hear that climate change is a hoax or anything else that denies the science behind climate change, it makes them feel better about their daily lives. To them, it does not matter that they drive gas cars, eat animal-based foods, use a ton of energy, or anything else that is considered a normal part of their lives. Remember how I mentioned that 97% of scientists agree that human activity is the primary driver behind climate change? Well, that means that there's about 3% of scientists that don't believe the science is quite clear. And these are the scientists that fossil fuel companies rely on and fund to question climate change. No matter how clear the science is, fossil fuel companies will continue to cast doubt on climate change if it means protecting their investments and their salary. And the more evidence that there is to suggest that climate change is in fact a major threat, the more money and effort these companies will put into casting doubt. I don't know about you, but all of the greed and selfishness involved in this capitalistic approach is something that really disgusts me. Besides protecting the profits of fossil fuel companies, there are two other big motives that I have noticed for climate change denial. The first is that some people believe fossil fuels are needed for America's future and the economy, which is not true. While fossil fuels do have their advantages, they are not a sustainable source of long-term energy, both for the environment and the economy. Electricity from fossil fuels usually averages between 5 and 17 cents per kilowatt hour, while solar averages 3 to 6 cents and wind is usually between 1 and 2 cents. Because solar and wind are cheaper, 70% of new energy generation in 2021 went into renewables around the world, and as technologies continue to get better with time, the cost will only go down. Speaking of which, developing these technologies allows for many more jobs to be created. Right now in 2022, about 1.2 million jobs are in fossil fuels, but nearly 3.3 million are with renewable technologies, even though renewables only generate about 20% of energy in the US. By investing in renewables, a lot more jobs can be made, and those working in the fossil fuel industry will be able to put their efforts towards clean technologies instead. So yes, fossil fuels may be a good reserve, but they cannot be the primary source of energy generation in the coming decades if global economies are to grow. Another reason that I've noticed for climate change denial is that some people believe the science is actually questionable. From what I've seen, that's usually because they have not experienced climate change on a personal level. They have not experienced storms, sea level rise, and so on in the places that they have lived in, so it does not seem important to them. Sometimes it's also because a 1 to 2 degrees Celsius rise in average temperature does not sound like a big deal. For these people, they usually have not done enough research on climate change, or they do not use reliable sources of information. Or, more often, they refuse to accept the truth because it's a depressing reality. And that leads me to the big question that we need to answer. What can you do about climate change denial? The very first thing you can do is accept the truth if you have not already. I don't think 97% of scientists around the world are on a mission to spread a lie that human activity causes climate change. No matter how unfortunate it sounds, the reality is that climate change is here and we need to do something about it. Be mindful of who you listen to about climate change. Listen to reports from organizations like the IPCC, NASA, and National Geographic, to name a few. These are the organizations that have millions of scientists around the world collectively putting thousands of hours into research into climate change and how we can address it. The second thing you can do is vote. The United States has one of the worst voter turnout rates in the world at just 67% in the 2020 election. Even though that was the best turnout in the 21st century, we can still do a lot better. And even if you're not from the US, you should still listen to politicians when they talk about climate change. If they are publicly denying or casting doubt on climate change, it's fair to assume that they're being paid millions to do so. And more importantly, these are not the people that we can rely on for a sustainable future. Although there may not necessarily be someone who will take all the action that's needed, I think it's best to vote for those who have a history and willingness to take action on climate change. The world needs it, both for the environment and global economies. And the last thing you can do is to be mindful of who you get your gas and energy from. I personally refuse to get my gas and energy from companies like BP, Shell, and Total because I don't want my money to eventually end up in the hands of someone in Congress to deny or cast doubt on climate change. If you want to see a more comprehensive list of which companies are lobbying to delay climate action, there is a site called Open Secrets, and you can see how much money has been sent by each company over time. I'll leave that link in the description for you. It may not contain every single guilty company, but it's a good starting point to see where not to get your gas and energy from. And finally, the last thing I have to share with you is how to talk to climate change deniers. Your natural instinct is probably to tell them all the scientific facts that you know, but the reality is that deniers and doubters don't care at all about the science. They will almost always refuse them and tell you their reasonings for why climate change is a hoax. Instead, what you need to do is tell stories about climate change. What I'm saying is that instead of resorting to logic, you need to resort to emotions, which people can resonate much better with. For example, you've probably heard the story of a plastic straw being found in a turtle's nose, which I won't show here because of copyright. But the point is, when people saw that video, they got concerned. And now there's a much bigger movement for paper and metal straws instead of plastic ones. So what stories can you share? The best ones are usually those you have experienced personally. One story that I like to share is about running. I ran cross country and track in high school, and that is a sport where colder temperatures lead to faster times because it helps you dissipate more body heat. The reality is that with every passing year, my coach had to push our practices earlier and earlier in the morning so that we could avoid the heat as much as possible, because it just got hotter every year. Practices went from 8 a.m. to 7:30 to 7 and sometimes 6:30. When we had our races, we also had to push those earlier in the day too to avoid the heat. And finally, in my senior year of high school, our state championship race got pushed a week because there was a massive drought in the South in 2016. And it led to a ton of fires in the Appalachian Mountains that affected the air quality in all of Georgia. It was hazardous to be outside doing physical activity for a long time, so we all had to run indoors, which was a major inconvenience for all of us. Maybe that story is not as compelling as the turtle, but it's a real-life example of climate change that I have experienced, and it's only knocking the door right now. If deniers still refuse to accept the reality of climate change, then I just leave them with this one point. You can deny climate change all you want, but you cannot avoid the truth. And that's it. After that, my time is better spent elsewhere, and you should not extend a conversation that goes in circles either. So share stories instead of depending on science. They can either be your own, or they can be someone else's that you may have heard in person or in a documentary maybe. In fact, if you have a story, please share it in the comments below. Now, as big of a problem as climate change denial is, the good news is that if fossil fuel companies really want to stay in business for the long term, they will have to shift towards newer technologies and cleaner energies that are now cheaper to adapt than fossil fuels. I don't know if it will happen soon enough, but regardless, they cannot keep this up forever. Either they will need to make changes that need to be done, or they will go down the drain like the coal industry is right now. But more than anything, we cannot feed into this greedy system of climate change denial. We need to take action, because nature can live without us, but we cannot live without nature. If you found this video insightful, then please give it a like and subscribe down below. I make climate change videos like this one very regularly on this channel, covering topics like climate change, politics, and actions that we need to take to address it. New videos are posted every Friday. If you want to learn how to prepare for a potential climate crisis, then click the video in the top right corner. But otherwise, thank you so much for watching and stay tuned. See ya!